Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has urged the Islamic world to help stop Indian atrocities in occupied Kashmir. Addressing an emergency virtual meeting of the OIC contact group on Jammu and Kashmir, Qureshi said India must end its unilateral and illegal actions in Kashmir. He said the human rights situation in occupied Kashmir is worsening. Qureshi said that India must hold a free and fair plebiscite in Kashmir as per the UN resolutions. Foreign ministers of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan and Niger also participated in the video conference. Indian troops murdered 32 people in the occupied territory this month alone. Kashmir has been under India's curfew and communications blackout since August last year. Following the deadliest border clash last week, commander-level talks between China and India are underway to ease tensions at the line of actual control. The clash at Galwan Valley sector of the territorial dispute resulted in the death of 20 Indian soldiers, including a colonel. The talks are taking place at Moldo on the Chinese side of the LAC. The first round of the core commander talks were held on June the 6th, where the two sides reached an important understanding on limited disengagement. But the consensus was breached on June the 15th during the de-escalation process. Meanwhile, former Indian Premier Manmohan Singh has cautioned Prime Minister Narendra Modi to be mindful of the implications of his statements. Speaking for the first time on the India-China face-off, Singh said Modi's statements could be used to vindicate Chinese position on the dispute. The World Health Organization has reported the largest single-day worldwide increase in coronavirus cases, with more than 183,000 infections in the last 24 hours. The UN Health Agency said Brazil led the way with nearly 54,800 cases tallied, while the US next at over 36,600. Globally, the COVID-19 death count has crossed 467,000 with nearly 9 million infections. More in this report.
As the number of COVID-19 patients spikes across the world, experts say the surge could be a reflection of broader testing. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration Commissioner has warned that some U.S. states can see an exponential rise in infections this coming week. Meanwhile, in Brazil, 641 people died overnight in the country, taking the tally to over 50,000. However, supporters of President Jair Bolsonaro took the streets of Sao Paulo to call for an end to the coronavirus restrictions.
In support of our President Jair Messias Bolsonaro, we want to go back to work. We want support for shopkeepers, support for entrepreneurs. These people here in Sao Paulo today, we are in support of Brazil. Let the work come back. Quarantine, yes, only the vertical quarantine. The horizontal quarantine is not compatible, and people over 60 who have a health problem stay at home.
Despite a spike in infections, Saudi Arabia has abruptly lifted all restrictions on businesses after 3 months of stringent curbs. But restrictions will remain intact on international flights and religious pilgrimages. Dubai has announced visitors' entry from July 7th, while foreigners with residency visas will be able to enter from June 22nd. In Germany's Göttingen city, police used pepper spray on residents violating restrictions and breaking quarantine amid spiking infections.
The police and I was able to see this with my own eyes on video. Had bottles, stones, metal bars, planks of wood, household objects and fireworks thrown at them. This is what led to the aforementioned injuries. During the police deployment, the police were forced to use measures like mild physical force, but a lot of pepper spray was also used.
Reported new coronavirus cases in South Korea have dipped to a nearly 1-month low, mainly due to less testing over the weekend. The country added 17 new cases, including 11 local infections, raising the total number of cases to 12,438.
In Pakistan, 89 more people have died from the coronavirus overnight, raising the toll to 3,590. The Health Ministry says nearly 4,500 new cases have been reported during the past 24 hours, bringing the count to 180,088. It said over 1.1 million tests have been conducted, with more than 30,500 conducted in a day. The ministry said over 71,400 patients of coronavirus have recovered so far. Well, there are more than 106,000 active cases in the country. The southern province of Sindh leads in the number of infections with nearly 70,000 cases, while Punjab is second with nearly 67,000 cases. The Taliban have released 14 Afghan soldiers and police officers as part of a prisoner swap under the peace deal signed with the US in Doha. In a series of tweets, the group spokesman Suhail Shaheen said the prisoners were released in Logar, Nangarhar and Nuristan provinces. Shaheen also said the Taliban officials met with the head of the UN mission in Afghanistan, Deborah Dion. He said the two sides discussed the release of the remaining prisoners and the start of the intra-Afghan talks. The prisoner exchange is part of a February deal with the US, which was signed with the Taliban in Qatar. Libya's GNA says it will not attend an emergency meeting of the Arab League called to discuss the country's ongoing crisis. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mohammed Al-Kablawi said Libya has refused to attend the meeting as it violates the organization's bylaws. The Foreign Ministry also said Libya will not send a delegation because it was not consulted over holding meeting. This comes after the League's Secretariat General said Egypt had requested an extraordinary meeting to discuss the latest developments in Libya. Meanwhile, Russia and Egypt say there is no alternative to peace solution of the Libyan conflict and called for the launch of comprehensive dialogue. Earlier, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi asked his army to be prepared to carry out any mission within its borders or outside the country. Palestinians are worried their limited access to the Dead Sea could be cut further if Israel annexes the occupied West Bank. Israel has announced plans to extend sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, including the Jordan Valley, which borders the Dead Sea. Palestinians have voiced outrage at the proposal. The Dead Sea is a popular destination where bathers float in hypersaline waters and use the nutrient-rich mud on their skin. Even some owners of the Israeli resorts are concerned they could lose customers under the annexation plan. Most countries view Israeli settlements in the occupied territory as illegal. South Korea has criticized a former White House National Security Advisor John Bolton and termed his account on summit diplomacy distorted. In a statement, National Security Director at the Office of President Chung Eui-yong says Bolton's account consists of inaccurate facts. Chung accused Bolton of unilaterally disclosing details of diplomatic consultations based on trust among relevant governments. Chung said Bolton's disclosure represents a violation of basic principle of diplomacy, which can seriously harm sincerity of future negotiations. He said such acts can also undermine the allies' efforts to advance joint strategies and bolster security interests. In his book, Bolton accused US President Donald Trump of threatening to withdraw US troops from South Korea to pressure Seoul to pay $5 billion. Bolton said Trump praised North Korea for launching missile and used it as a bargaining chip to demand money from Seoul. The European Union and China have sought to cool tensions at a video summit. It is the first formal talks since ties soured over European accusations that Beijing has spread disinformation about the novel coronavirus. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen held a video conference with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. China and the EU reaffirmed commitment to conclude a comprehensive bilateral investment agreement in 2020. The leaders of both the sides agreed to make all the efforts to reach consensus on rules concerning fair competition. Earlier, EU officials said that China has sought to pressure EU countries that criticize its handling of the novel coronavirus. However, Beijing has denied wrongdoing. A local armed group has killed 19 civilians in Congo's eastern Kivu and Ituri regions. Officials say bodies of the 9 people kidnapped on Friday have now been found in Kivu's northern area, while the armed group has slayed 10 civilians in the neighboring Ituri region. The Allied Democratic Forces have been blamed for killing about 500 people since last year in retaliation for an army crackdown on their bases in the Beni region. Dozens of armed groups operate in eastern Congo, a legacy of the two wars in the 1990s that pulled in neighboring Uganda and Rwanda. Serbian President Alexander Vučić has declared a landslide victory for his SNS right-wing coalition in Sunday's parliamentary elections. In a country of over 6.5 million voters, almost 3,500 candidates competed to enter the 250-seat National Assembly. According to preliminary results from the Republic Election Commission, the SNS has won over 63% of the vote. Talking to media at the party headquarters, Vučić said his coalition received more than 2 million votes.
Tonight, we received a huge vote of confidence from the people, the greatest ever in Serbia, and when few expected it. It is also a great warning from the people asking of us to be even more responsible, more serious. We must work more, and we must achieve the best results possible for our citizens.
Meanwhile, the opposition Union for Serbia Alliance, which boycotted the elections, said the low turnout proved that the boycott was successful. And now moving on, in the UK, Black Lives protests continue as thousands of people across the country took to the streets for the fourth running weekend. Protesters in London gathered in Hyde Park before starting their march towards Downing Street. Large gatherings and lack of social distancing were seen, breaching the COVID-19 guidelines, but most of the demonstrators were wearing masks. The police guarded a Queen Victoria monument, which was defaced by the protesters earlier this month in Woodhouse Moor Park. Meanwhile, in the English Premier League of football, players and referees wore Black Lives Matter shirts during the Everton vs Liverpool match. They also took a knee as the opening whistle was blown. Saudi Arabia says it plans to start a tourism development fund with an initial capital investment of $4 billion. In a statement, Minister for Tourism Ahmed Al-Khatib says the fund will launch equity and debt investment vehicles to develop the sector. Khatib said the fund is testament to investor and private sector confidence in the long-term outlook for tourism in Saudi Arabia. Last year, Saudi Arabia opened up to international tourists and launched a new visa regime, appealing foreign companies to invest in the sector. Riyadh estimates that tourism will contribute over 10% of GDP by 2030. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is set to announce if the hospitality sector can reopen and social distancing rule can be relaxed. Non-essential shops have already reopened in England, with retail resuming in Wales from today. Earlier, Health Secretary Matt Hancock said England is clearly on track to further ease lockdown restrictions, but the government warned that the moves will be reversed if they led to virus surge. Meanwhile, Spain has reopened its borders to most European countries as well as Britain as the COVID-19 state of emergency ends in the country. Elsewhere, France says it may impose a new lockdown in French Guiana as the coronavirus spread faster there in the last 10 days. Russia says its coronavirus vaccine will give people protection against the virus for a period of over 2 years. Director of the National Research Center, Alexander Ginsburg, said the vaccine is being developed jointly with the Russian Defense Ministry. Ginsburg said the vaccine is given twice with the same gene injected using different carriers. He said this will not only allow protective immunity, but also acquire it for a longer period of time. The director said about 50 to 60 million doses of the vaccine will need to be produced to carry out mass COVID-19 vaccination in Russia. Clinical trials of this developed coronavirus vaccine started earlier this month. The trials are expected to be completed by the end of July. It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. An Iranian ship with a cargo of food has reached the Venezuelan waters despite strong opposition from the U.S. The Iranian embassy in Venezuela says the Golsan will arrive carrying food to open the first Iranian supermarket in Venezuela. Iran supplied 1.5 million barrels of fuel to Venezuela last month amid a collapse of refinery operations and tightening sanctions by the U.S. Tehran says it could dispatch 2 to 3 monthly shipments of gasoline to its ally Venezuela to help it ease the fuel shortage. Panama has exhumed remains of 19 victims of 1989 U.S. invasion from a cemetery as part of an official investigation into the operation. About 500 Panamanians are believed to have been killed by the U.S. in the invasion, but rights groups say the true number is higher. The remains of 19 victims were initially placed into mass graves but later reburied in a cemetery in Panama City along with dozens of others. Exhumation is part of a probe initiated by Panama's former president Juan Carlos Varela, who set up a commission to investigate the death toll. On 20th of December 1989, the U.S. invaded Panama after ties between the leaders of both the countries sank to an all-time low. U.S. President George H.W. Bush ordered military action. Turkey says about 25,000 people have died in the Mediterranean Sea over the last 8 years. In a video conference, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan says those people set out with a hope for a safe future, but most of the journeys ended up in death. Erdogan said fate of about 10,000 Syrian children who sought asylum in Europe is still unknown. He said, migration issue remains a global phenomenon as millions of people still have to leave their homes due to war, instability, terror and poverty. Erdogan said Ankara embraced everyone without any discrimination while EU countries place its quota on them. He said people should drop their prejudice about migration and must become aware of the contributions migrants bring to countries and societies. Erdogan said there are nearly 260 million migrants, over 71 million displaced people, and over 25 million refugees in the world. In Canada, yoga enthusiasts have come out for the first time since the coronavirus pandemic began to celebrate the International Day of Yoga. They have created geodesic domes to practice their poses, maintaining social distance and perform fitness activities in safe and responsible way. More in this report.
After months of taking classes online due to lockdown restrictions, yoga enthusiasts in Toronto came out to practice in individual clear geodesic domes. Every student is assigned their own dome, which stands more than 7 feet tall and 12 feet wide. It has built-in heating regulation that creates a similar atmosphere as a hot yoga studio. The 50 domes are cleaned and disinfected after every use to prevent the spread of coronavirus.
The event is a hot yoga and fitness event. It occurs in 50 private clear geodesic bubbles, domes. They're sanitized in between classes. We leave enough time, and they're sanitized by certified professional cleaners.
The event is being hosted by LMNTS Outdoor Studio, partnering with 6 local studios. Organizers say the abrupt closure of fitness facilities inspired them to launch the event. They said there is still no official reopening date in sight for these venues. Enthusiasts are happy to come out as they get to connect with the world once again.
The domes were pretty cool because I was able to get like a bird's eye view of all the students. So I felt like even though I wasn't able to obviously physically connect or touch any of my students to adjust them, it was really easy to like point people out and connect with them in a moment in their dome. So especially after teaching on Zoom for the last few months, it was a really great change.
The event is set to last until July 31st.
IMF says it has earmarked a $25 billion fund for 70 countries as COVID-19 pandemic continues to ripple across the globe. IMF spokesperson Jerry Rice said emergency financing is fast disbursing and unconditional. Rice said money will be spent on payment of nurses and doctors' salaries and for purchase of medical equipment to deal with crisis. Rice said 7 countries in Asia and Pacific region have received emergency financing of about $1.5 billion, while in sub-Saharan Africa Africa, 28 countries have received emergency financing of nearly $10 billion. Earlier this year, IMF said over 100 countries requested emergency financing, and it had doubled access to its emergency facilities to meet the demand. European stock markets are trading higher, erasing their early losses. Auto sector led the gains by jumping over 1.5%. Frankfurt's DAX has gained a fraction. CAC 40 in Paris is also trading fractionally higher. London's FTSE 100 is trading flat. In Asia, Seoul's Kospi led the gains, closing over 0.5% higher. Hong Kong's Hang Seng index lost over 0.5% as shares of Chinese tech giant Alibaba dropped over 2%. Nikkei 225 lost marginally, while Shanghai Composite traded flat. Meanwhile, international benchmark Brent crude oil price has gained a fraction, powering early losses. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.